Hello, and welcome back to ThoughtBat. Over the recent months, as this channel has become more well known to the left-wing online community, I have often been mistaken as an advocate of syndicalism. Only the previous night did someone appear in my Discord DMs to clarify if I was in fact a syndicalist, and then they proceeded to try and convince me that China at all sets a good example of socialist praxis. And if I'm being fair, it's not completely unreasonable to assume that I am a syndicalist. Syndicalism has played an incredibly large role in anarchist history, especially being the dominant tendency in revolutionary Catalonia, which is an experiment I often cite as a historical example of anarchism in practice. The pinned tweet on my Twitter page does indeed romanticize the men and women who fought for the liberty in Spain, and I have no principle or ethical objection to syndicalists anywhere near to the same manner as I have with Leninists, Trotskyists, or other authoritarians, people who I consider to be genuine threats to the cause of freedom. But it remains that syndicalism doesn't appear in the long list of labels which I am comfortable identifying with, and this video is to clarify why. Syndicalism is a revolutionary current in the labour movement which places an emphasis on the role of trade unions to spearhead working class emancipation and the overthrow of capitalist hegemony. Anarcho-Syndicalism is what I said just then, but in keeping with anarchist principles. Before I continue with my critique, I must stress that this video is not against unionisation or organised labour. The advantages brought to a unionised workforce in contrast with one which possesses zero capacity for collective bargaining is clear, obvious and undeniable. My message as far as prescription is concerned is this: join a union and you'll be thankful for it. For anarchists to alienate themselves from trade unions is to alienate themselves from the centre of working class counterpower, and I don't think that's a good idea. My issue with syndicalism is not the concept of unionisation itself, but the notion that trade unions, or confederations of trade unions as political units, are capable of adequately spearheading social progress in an anarchist direction. The Italian anarchist Enrico Malatesta clarified his objection to such a prioritisation of the trade union's leadership role in the revolution as thus: it, that being trade unionism, has to reckon with present interests, and these interests are not always, alas, those of the revolution. It must not too far exceed legal bounds, and it must at given moments treat it with the masters and the authorities. It must concern itself with the interests of sections of the workers rather than the interests of the public, the interests of the unions rather than the interests of the mass of workers and the unemployed. If it does not do this, then it has no specific reason to exist. It would then only include the anarchists or most socialists, and would lose its principal utility, which is to educate and habituate to the struggle of the masses that lag behind. Besides, since the unions must remain open to all those who desire to win from the masses better conditions of life, whatever their opinions may be on the general constitution of society, they are naturally led to moderate their aspirations. First, so that they should not frighten away those who wish to have with them, and second, because, in proportion as the numbers increase, those with ideas who have initiated the movement may remain buried in a majority that's only occupied with the petty interests of the moment. So, there's two key points here which Malatesta is getting at. One, unions can only represent a given portion of the public. They exclude the unemployed, the disabled, the students, the elderly, the incarcerated, agents of the black market, and workers in industries where unionisation comes with its own complications. Having a resultant society be shaped by trade unions is to have the interests of only the unionised workers imposed on the rest of society. And two, unions are necessarily reformist institutions. They need to focus their efforts in bringing about short-term, immediate improvements to their members' working conditions. If they reserve their resources and planning for long-term ideological ends, they become useless as unions, and workers necessarily revoke their subscriptions in favour of joining unions which actually do offer improvements to their daily lives. Unions cannot maximise their membership as quickly as possible without sacrificing their anarchist or revolutionary principles, and it cannot shelf its ambition to attract as many workers as possible in order to carry out its function as an effective union. So it seems to me that only revolutionary parties or anarchist federations are capable of reaching out to the masses without compromising on their radical nature. As unions grow amongst labour pools which are not so class conscious, they necessarily sanitise their radicalism and are likely to be absorbed into the wider reformist movement. After all, what immediate good is a trade union which doesn't collaborate with a major reformist party of the day to lobby to extend labour protections in state law? Of course, to reiterate my earlier point, the expansion of workers' rights and the gradual improvements to working conditions brought about by the trade unions are not necessarily bad things on their own. They just cannot work towards anarchist or even syndicalist ends. Whether or not reformism or electoralism are practices anarchists should engage in is irrelevant to the question of how much trade unions can offer the anarchist cause, and the answer I find is very little further than those short-term gains. I see cooperatives to have the same problems but to a greater extent. As political units, they can only offer short-term advantages to the individual workers, i.e. control over their workplaces, but cooperatives themselves are powerless in leading a movement against capitalist hegemony as a whole and can only represent the workers who work at those co-ops. Unions and cooperatives can only be products and components of class consciousness and counter-hegemony respectively, but never their prerequisites or leaders. So the common objection to this view of syndicalism is, but what of a CNT? What of the Catalan anarcho-syndicalists who are heroized by anarchists today? Did they not give us a clear example of how trade unions can lead workers' emancipation in line with the principles of anarchism? Whilst I have no doubt that the great many members of the CNT and lesser-known unions which played an active role in the Spanish Revolution at the time were heroes who fought with a spirit of anarchism in their hearts, it's difficult for me to accept that they are an example of unions leading a political shift towards anarchism. Anarchist sentiments were already rooted deeply amongst the industrial workers across Spain, which made the formation of the CNT as an anarcho-syndicalist organisation possible in the first place. It should be noted here that the CNT is not actually a trade union, but a confederation of trade unions which each operate within various sectors and workforces. The CNT itself is not strictly an anarchist organisation anyway. It understood its function as a confederation of unions and accepted members only on the basis that they were working class and not police, landlords or capitalists. Due to the already established hunger for revolution within the Spanish working class, the CNT was able to cement itself as a popular organisation in the labour movement which simultaneously remained radical and revolutionary. The majority of members were anarcho-syndicalists, but opposing ideological factions emerged and grew within the CNT bureaucracy as its membership expanded amongst the union movement. The FAI, standing for Iberian Anarchist Federation, was established in 1927 as a pan-Iberian movement attempting to unite anarchists across Spain and Portugal. It should be stated here that, although identifying with the anarcho-syndicalist cause and fully believing in the role of trade unions in the anarchist movement, the FAI itself was not a trade union. It was, as the name suggests, a federation of anarchists. Unlike trade unions, anarchist federations base their membership according to ideological adherence to anarchist principles as opposed to just being working class. Anarchist federations operate within unions, often multiple at a time, as well as other organisations consisting of demographics who may have material incentives to join the anarchist cause and attempt to radicalise people whilst organising direct action on their own with no commitment to short-term gains in the workplace. The FAI operated within the CNT and challenged its leadership, who they believed to be on a path to moderation and becoming a mediating link between labour and capital, as predicted by Malatesta. In order to keep the CNT on an anarchist path, the FAI made use of its disproportional hegemony within the CNT to expel less radical syndicalists from the union. This led to the development of anti-FAI factions, as well as significant breakaway groups such as the Syndicalist Party. By the time of the Civil War, a much weakened CNT was under the firm control of the FAI, thus making it difficult to suggest that revolutionary Catalonia was so much led by trade unions as much as an anarchist federation. The remaining unions continued to associate with CNT for clout purposes and because of the threats to organised labour which were coming from the nationalist faction in Spain. The particular developments within Catalonia would be a different topic altogether. Since the Civil War, and for various reasons, including fascist persecution, the CNT's influence in the Spanish labour movement has declined significantly. Although it remains a considerable force today in providing workers a revolutionary alternative to collective bargaining in line with the principles of anarchism, it remains that the critique given by Malatesta that revolutionary unions face a battle between its role as a union and as a proponent of any particular radical ideology was proven to be accurate. The CNT is of course not the only example of this. The CGT of France has demonstrated the capacity of a trade union to shift from anarcho-syndicalism to Marxist-Leninism and eventually into moderation. This isn't to suggest that federations and parties are incapable of ideological shifts, but they seem to have much more control over their ideological framework as they are able to base their membership on ideological commitment. It is for these reasons I do not consider myself to be a syndicalist, despite being a supporter of the trade union movement as a whole. However, with all that being said, I hope you found this video thought-provoking. If you did, give it a like and subscribe to the channel, If you're a syndicalist who thinks I was talking complete rubbish, let me know about it in the comments and I will respond to your criticism as I always do. Whilst you're at it, you can follow me on Twitter and join the Batcave Discord server. All the links are in the description, and with all that, I will see you later. Goodbye.